The dangerous symptoms men ignore and what it's costing them. It started with a cough. Nothing big, nothing painful, just a little dry bark that showed up when David laughed too hard. He was 66, retired firefighter, still strong, still sharp, still able to carry groceries with one hand and grandkids with the other. He had been through worse: burning buildings, smoke-filled nights, grief that came and went like sirens. A cough? He shrugged it off. But 2 months later, the cough was still there, and now it came at night, a whisper in the ribs. His wife asked about it. He joked. She pressed. He changed the subject. "I'm fine," he said. He wasn't. 6 months later, they found a tumor. Not huge, not advanced, but not early either. It had time. Time he'd given it, because he didn't want to seem worried. And that's the truth most men carry in silence. It's not that they don't feel the symptoms. It's that they don't want to feel weak. And that reluctance, however noble, however human, is killing them. This is not a lecture. This is not a scare tactic. This is an invitation. Because what if the things you ignore aren't minor? What if the little ache, the soft throb, the odd fatigue, the new mole, the persistent bathroom trip? What if they're not age? What if they're messengers? What if your body has been trying to tell you something and you've been too loyal to your pride to listen? Men are taught to endure, to shake things off, to out-tough the ticking clock. But biology doesn't care about toughness. Cancer doesn't flinch when you act brave. Heart disease doesn't delay because you don't want to burden your family. Stroke doesn't wait while you decide whether the dizziness is worth calling a doctor. And the most tragic part? Most of the men I've lost didn't need to be lost. They just didn't act early. Let me tell you about Jerome. He was 59, accountant, quiet, steady, thoughtful. Came in one day because his wife made the appointment, said he'd been feeling off. Nothing big. We talked. He had no chest pain, no shortness of breath. But when I pressed, he mentioned something strange. Sometimes my jaw gets tight, especially when I climb stairs fast. His EKG was almost normal. Almost. But I've learned not to ignore the word strange. So we pushed further. Stress test, angiogram, 95% blockage in the left anterior descending artery. They call it the widowmaker. He didn't know it, but he was walking around with a bomb in his chest, and that tight jaw was the whisper before the explosion. We fixed it. He's alive today, because someone listened to a symptom that didn't even seem like a symptom. So let me ask you, do you feel more tired than usual, even after sleep? Do you urinate more often at night? Do you feel bloated or full quickly after eating? Have you lost weight without trying, or gained it, even though your habits haven't changed? Is your handwriting smaller? Have you tripped more in the last year? These are not quirks. They are clues. Your body is a marvel of communication, but it does not speak English. It speaks through sensation, through subtle shifts, through patterns. And if you ignore its language, you will miss its warnings. Now, I'm not here to fill you with fear. I'm here to give you agency, because most of what matters, truly matters, is still within your control. The earlier you act, the more options you have. The sooner you speak, the better your odds. And sometimes the only difference between tragedy and testimony is a single checkup. Next, we'll go deeper into the top 5 symptoms men ignore that aren't painful, but are profoundly dangerous, and we'll tell the stories of those who listened in time and those who didn't. But before we do, ask yourself, what are you feeling that you've been calling nothing? And what if that was the very thing that might save your life? Let's continue. The top 5 silent symptoms that should scare you, but don't. The first thing to understand is this: pain isn't the body's only alarm. In fact, most of the men I've seen who waited until there was pain came too late. Because the body often starts with whispers, and men are very good at ignoring whispers. Let's start with the one that surprises most: urination at night. Waking once a night? Maybe normal, but twice? 3 times? Every night? That's not just getting older. That's your prostate asking for attention. Take Gary. He was 68, fit, active, still doing light construction work, but he'd started peeing twice every night, sometimes 3. No pain, just disruption. One morning he noticed blood in the bowl. That got his attention. Turned out he had prostate cancer, slow growing, early stage. But cancer nonetheless. We caught it, treated it. He's fine, but here's what he told me during treatment. Doc, if it had been pain, I would have come right away. I just didn't think annoyance was enough. It was? The second silent symptom? Unexpected fatigue? And I don't mean I stayed up too late. I mean, I slept well, but I still feel heavy in my body. This one is tricky because men don't like to say they're tired. They say they're fine, just need to push through, or probably low on coffee. But real fatigue isn't fixed by caffeine. It's a sign your blood isn't carrying enough oxygen. It can mean anemia. It can mean heart failure. Or in the case of Daniel, 64, it meant leukemia. No weight loss, no bleeding, no fevers, just tired. He came in because his wife begged him to. His white blood cell count was sky high. We got him into treatment within a week. He was lucky, but the only reason he made it? Someone saw tired as a symptom, not a weakness. Third, subtle digestive changes. I had a patient, Ben, 71, said he felt weirdly full after eating even small meals. Also noticed his stools had changed, looser, sometimes pale. No pain, no nausea, just changes. He almost didn't come in, said it felt too minor to waste a doctor's time. It wasn't. We found a small mass in his pancreas, caught early, something rare. And that's what you need to know. Pancreatic cancer is almost always diagnosed late because the early symptoms are just discomforts. Fullness, mild nausea. Back pain, things most men would rather ignore than talk about. Ben didn't. He listened to his body, and now he's alive to tell the story. Number 4, a change in handwriting. Yes, you read that right. One of my longtime patients, Art 70, came in for something completely unrelated, but I noticed his signature looked small, cramped. I asked about it. He shrugged. I sent him to a neurologist anyway. Early stage Parkinson's. No tremor, no stiffness, just a shrinking signature and a slight slowness he hadn't even noticed. Now he's in therapy, on medication, managing it, because someone noticed the writing was different, not just on the paper, but in his brain. And finally, the 5th symptom men ignore, because it feels too small to matter. Dizziness, not spinning the room. Dizziness, just a half second of lightheadedness when standing up, a momentary loss of balance, a weird moment. That's what Frank called it. He was 62, worked in tech, always tired but never stopped. He mentioned almost offhand that he felt a little dizzy walking upstairs. His blood pressure was fine. Heart rate? Normal, but something didn't feel right. We ran a Holter monitor, caught a dangerous arrhythmia. His heart was pausing between beats. 2 weeks later, he had a pacemaker, and his color came back. His thinking cleared. His energy returned. He'd been living at half power for years and didn't even know. Here's what all of these men had in common. They almost didn't come in because the symptom didn't hurt, because it didn't feel serious, because they didn't want to be dramatic, because they were too strong or too proud to make a fuss. And yet each of those symptoms was a clue, a breadcrumb leading toward either prevention or catastrophe. What changed their story? One thing, they acted before the pain. In our next chapter, we'll explore why men are conditioned to ignore their bodies and how this quiet stoicism is creating a silent epidemic of late diagnoses. But before we go there, ask yourself, what small signal have you been brushing off? What minor thing have you dismissed? And what if that one thing, right now, is the invitation your body is waiting for you to answer? Let's keep going. There's more to uncover. The real danger is never the symptom itself. It's the silence around it, and silence is something men know too well. We're taught to tolerate, to minimize, to keep moving, but the body isn't interested in our pride. It keeps score, and it whispers, softly at first, hoping you'll notice before it has to shout. That whisper might be waking twice a night to urinate, something so many men call just getting older. But the prostate doesn't care about your calendar. It responds to inflammation, growth, pressure, and sometimes to cells turning quietly malignant. The bathroom visits aren't just about comfort. They're about a gland trying to get your attention before it changes the course of your life. Or maybe it's not urination. Maybe it's just being tired. Not just any tired, the kind that lingers even after rest, that makes the simplest day feel like a climb. The kind you brush off because everyone feels this way. Except not everyone is hiding a slow bleed, or failing kidneys, or a heart that doesn't feel quite right anymore. Fatigue is one of the most disrespected symptoms in medicine, and in men, it's often a prelude. There was a man named Daniel who once said to me, "I'm not sick, I'm just slow." His hemoglobin was half of what it should have been, internal bleeding, treatable, reversible, once seen. But it took his wife 6 weeks to get him to come in. By then, he could barely climb a flight of stairs. And still he said, "I didn't want to overreact." Let that sit with you. He was bleeding inside and worried about making a fuss. Others feel it in their gut. Not pain, but change. Meals don't feel the same. You fill up faster. Your stool is different, pale, thin, strange. You blame the bread, the sauce, the fact that you're not 20 anymore. But sometimes it's the pancreas, or the colon, or the liver. And sometimes it's already begun to grow, not fast, not loud, just enough to change the shape of your digestion, the speed of your fullness, the way your body speaks to food. One man told me he hadn't had an appetite in months. When I asked why he waited, he said, "Because I thought losing a little weight was a good thing." It wasn't. Then there are the signs so small they almost escape language. Your handwriting changes. You drop the pen more. You shuffle your feet a bit without realizing. You move slower, not from age, but from disconnection. Something in the wiring remembers how you used to stand taller, walk straighter, move quicker. Parkinson's doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives with subtlety, a signature that shrinks, a voice that softens, a rhythm that falters. And if we wait for the shaking, we've waited too long. Even dizziness, the kind that makes you pause on the stairs or reach for the counter, doesn't seem like much. It passes. You tell yourself you stood too quickly or skipped lunch. But dizziness is how the heart sometimes tells you it's misfiring, that the rhythm is off, that the electrical signals are skipping beats or pausing in ways that aren't dangerous. Yet, Frank came in because he stumbled once. His wife noticed his color was off. His heart was skipping every 8th beat. He didn't feel pain. He felt odd. That oddness bought him time, bought him life. What every man needs to know is this: the symptom you ignore because it feels weak might be the clue that keeps you alive long enough to meet your grandson, to walk your daughter down the aisle, to kiss your partner goodnight 10 years from now. There is no medal for toughness when you're gone, no reward for pretending you're fine, but there is deep strength in listening. In looking at your body the way you would your oldest friend and saying, "You're speaking, I'm ready to hear you." Because maybe it's not just a cough or a nighttime trip to the bathroom or an off day. Maybe it's the beginning of your return to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, it saves you. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that holds more than words ever could. This was a man who'd survived a war, raised 2 children, buried his brother, and retired with honor. But now, at 72, he was ashamed of a feeling he couldn't name. "I just don't feel like myself anymore," he finally said. "But I keep thinking, it's just age, right?" That sentence, I've heard it more times than I can count. It's just age. But just age has become a hiding place, a bucket we throw every symptom into when we're too tired, too uncertain, or too afraid to ask what else it might be. The problem isn't age, the problem is assumption, because just age doesn't cause new chest pressure that climbs into your neck. Just age doesn't make your bowel habits change overnight. Just age doesn't cause one side of your face to go numb for 30 seconds. Just age doesn't cause you to forget your route home. Once, and yet, these are the symptoms men dismiss with a shrug, a joke, or a stubborn silence that hardens over time. There's a kind of loneliness that builds when you don't trust your own body anymore, when the mirror shows someone you recognize but don't quite believe in. I met a man once, Harvey, who had always prided himself on never seeing a doctor. Strong as an ox, he'd say, and for most of his life, he was. But then came the heartburn, subtle, creeping. He blamed the ribs, the chili, the wine, but it came back more than once, and sometimes it wrapped around into his back. He still didn't come in. He only showed up after he fainted while trimming a hedge. By then, it wasn't heartburn, it was angina. And it wasn't just heart disease, it was nearly a heart attack waiting in the wings. When I told him, he nodded slowly, didn't say much. But later, he whispered something that hit me harder than most things ever do. "I didn't want to know," he said, "because if I knew, I'd have to do something. And doing something meant admitting I wasn't invincible anymore." That's the trap. We confuse invincibility with identity. We think that to ask for help is to lose something, to surrender strength, control, dignity. But here's what I've seen over and over again. The strongest men I've ever met weren't the ones who avoided doctors. They were the ones who chose to listen to their bodies, who came in not because they were weak, but because they wanted to stay present for their partners, for their families, for themselves. And so they caught things early. They had choices. They had time. Time to walk their granddaughter to school. Time to play the piano again, just once. Time to sit on a porch and say, "I'm still here." So if you're reading this, if you've been carrying something strange, something small, something that feels off, but not urgent, I'll ask you this. Is it really nothing, or is it the body trying to speak to you softly, hoping you'll listen before it has to scream? You don't have to wait for pain. You don't have to earn help through suffering. You can choose to act from love, not fear. And that choice, quiet, strong, brave, might just be the thing that keeps you alive. Not just living, but truly, fully here. You deserve that, even if no one ever told you, especially if no one ever told you. He came in with a tremor, barely noticeable, a slight shake in the right hand when he reached for his coffee. Probably too much caffeine, he joked, though he hadn't had any yet that day. I asked him to write his name. He did, slowly, carefully. The letters were smaller than I expected, tighter, as if his body had forgotten how much space it was allowed to take up. He didn't want to be there, said his wife insisted. Said he felt mostly fine. But when I asked how long it had been happening, he hesitated. Months, he said. But I figured, I'm getting older. There it is again. That phrase. The universal excuse that stops so many men from walking through the door before it's too late. And it wasn't just his hand. He'd started walking slower, barely noticeable at first. His voice had softened too, less volume, less force. And yet, inside, he was still trying to be the same man he'd always been. We sent him for tests. He had early Parkinson's, manageable, treatable. But it was there. It had been there for a while. When I told him, he looked away, then said something that still echoes in my memory. I thought if I ignored it long enough, maybe it would forget about me. There's a quiet grief in realizing your body has been asking for help while you've been pretending not to hear it. But there's also power in naming the thing. When you speak it, you own it. You're not behind it anymore. You're in front of it, and that's where strength lives. There's this idea, passed from father to son, uncle to nephew, coach to athlete, that noticing is weakness, that to feel something off and name it is to lose some part of your masculinity. But let me tell you what I've seen. I've seen men waited so long to be seen. I've seen men diagnosed with stage 4 cancer who said, "I thought it was just back pain." I've seen men who collapsed from strokes say, "I figured the numbness would go away on its own." And I've seen men survive, not because they were stronger, but because they were willing to be curious. That's it. Curiosity over ego, attention over denial, self-respect over self-neglect. Because sometimes courage isn't pulling a loved one from a burning car or working 40 years without complaint. Sometimes courage is saying, something feels off. I need to find out why. Sometimes it's making the call, taking the test, asking the question that scares you. And here's the beautiful twist. Most of the time, what's found early isn't fatal. It's fixable, or at the very least, livable. It's the waiting that makes it dangerous, because time is a doctor's greatest tool, and silence is the thing that dulls it. A man once told me, I didn't want to worry my wife, so I kept it to myself. That man died 6 months later, not because of his illness, but because of its head start. So, I'll ask you plainly, is there something you've noticed but explained away? A tightness? A change? A whisper from your body that you've pushed aside? And what would it cost you to check? Not your pride, not your strength, just an hour. A test, a conversation, and maybe, just maybe, a longer life. Not just in years, but in the quality of those years. In the presence you bring to your family. In the peace you give to the people who love you. In the nights you sleep without wondering what you're avoiding. You deserve that. Even if you're scared. Especially if you're scared. Let that be the thing that brings you forward, not the thing that holds you back. He stood by the window of my office, arms crossed over his chest, looking out at nothing in particular. The light hit his face in such a way that I could see the years in his eyes, steady, weathered, tired in a way he hadn't quite admitted. I don't want to be the guy who runs to the doctor over every little thing, he said, still watching the street. But I also don't want to drop dead in the kitchen one morning while making toast. That sentence hung between us, blunt and honest. No drama, just the truth of a man torn between silence and survival. And there it was, the quiet war so many men fight. They don't fear death, not exactly. They fear being a burden. They fear being told something they can't unhear. They fear the look in a loved one's eyes if the news is bad. They fear the shift from protector to patient, so they carry it alone. The irregular heartbeat, the shortness of breath climbing stairs that used to be easy. The memory lapse they laugh off, but remember later in the quiet. I once had a patient who came in because he couldn't tie his tie as easily anymore. Just one morning, his fingers didn't cooperate the way they used to. He thought maybe arthritis. I thought maybe not. He had early signs of a neurological disorder, treatable, manageable. But if he hadn't come in, if he'd just switched to T-shirts and called it aging, it would have progressed silently, taking more than just his fine motor skills. It's never about just one symptom. It's about the pattern they create, the way they build a picture, if someone's willing to look closely enough. But you have to show up first. You have to be willing to look with me. I think of the man who said, "I didn't come because I didn't want to hear it," and the man after him who said, "I'm glad I came because now I have a plan." Same fear, different choice, very different outcome. There's nothing noble about pretending you're invulnerable. Real strength, the kind that lasts, isn't about pushing through. It's about protecting the time you still have. The mornings you haven't yet lived, the hands you still get to hold. And it starts with this question. What if that thing you're ignoring isn't just a nuisance? What if it's the first warning bell? What if it's still early enough to do something about it? You don't have to know the answer. You only have to be willing to ask the question out loud. You've carried enough in silence. Maybe now is the time to let someone help you carry this too. He didn't cry when I told him. Most men don't. Not right away. He sat still, jaw set, eyes scanning the room as if the answer might be printed on the walls. A slow nod, a quiet, "Okay?" Then silence. "You caught it early," I said. "Really early? That's the good news." And it was. His tests had shown a small mass, operable, contained, not yet dangerous. We had time, options, a path forward. But still, the weight of the word cancer hung in the air between us like second-hand smoke. He exhaled. "I almost didn't come. I thought it would go away." And I nodded, because I've heard those words 100 times before. I thought it would go away. It's the prayer of strong men, men who don't want to worry anyone, who think maybe if they wait long enough, the storm will pass on its own. But the body doesn't work that way. It whispers, then it speaks, then it demands. And the tragedy is how often we ignore that first whisper, that tiny skin change you cover with a sleeve, that cough you explain away with weather, that slight pressure in the chest you chalk up to sleeping funny, that mole that's darker than it used to be, that weight loss you didn't plan, that bruise that doesn't heal. Each one a thread, tugging gently, waiting to be noticed. And yet we wait because we don't want to feel weak or afraid or like someone else is taking control of our body. We wait because we want to stay in charge. But here's the twist. Real control doesn't come from denial. It comes from knowledge, from catching it early, from walking into the storm with your eyes open. The men who survive are not the ones who wait until they can't ignore it. They are the ones who speak up when it's almost nothing. And sometimes it is nothing. But wouldn't you rather know that than wonder? Because I've also seen the other side. The man who ignored a cough until it filled his lungs. The one who explained away exhaustion until it became leukemia. The one who waited on chest pain until it turned into a widowmaker. Their wives sat in my office later and said the same thing. He said he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Your body is not an enemy. It's a partner, and it doesn't ask you to panic. It asks you to pay attention. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. So here's what I want you to know. You're not less of a man because you asked for help. You're more of one because you stayed. You showed up. You chose life when it was still choosing you back. That's what strength looks like. And it might be the most important thing you ever do. There was a man, Joseph, who waited 8 months to tell anyone about the blood in his stool. It wasn't every day. Just now and then, a smear here, a streak there. He blamed the chili, the red wine, the stress of downsizing. Even when the toilet water turned pink, he turned the page in his mind. I didn't want to know, he told me later, because I wasn't ready to rearrange my life around a diagnosis. But cancer doesn't wait for readiness. It doesn't need permission to grow. It thrives in silence, in the space between symptoms and action. And yet, Joseph was lucky. It hadn't spread. Surgery, follow-up, a change in diet, and he got to stay in his life. But every time we met, he said the same thing. I wish I had come sooner. Not because he was afraid, but because he realized he had spent so many nights worrying quietly, secretly Googling in the dark when he could have had answers. Options. Peace. So many men live like that, hovering between doubt and decision, hoping time will offer mercy. But time doesn't give clarity. Action does, and it's not just the life-threatening things. It's the life-dimming ones, the persistent low mood, the loss of interest in things you used to love, the sense that you're watching your life rather than living it. That's not just retirement adjustment. That could be low testosterone, or untreated depression, or a thyroid that's fallen asleep on the job. You don't need to suffer in stoic silence. You're allowed to want joy, to want energy, to want yourself back. There's an entire generation of men walking around like ghosts, tired, foggy, emotionally numb, not because they're old, but because their biochemistry is begging for help. And when you give it, even gently, the body responds. Sleep returns. Desire rekindles. The lights come back on. Sometimes the healing isn't in a pill. It's in being witnessed. In someone finally saying, I see you, let's figure this out together. Because the body doesn't want perfection. It wants partnership. And I've seen transformations you wouldn't believe, not because we discovered something dramatic, but because we didn't miss it. So if something feels different, strange, persistent, off, don't talk yourself out of it. Talk yourself into listening. It's not about fearing the worst. It's about refusing to settle for less than what's possible. Not just years, but years with presence, with agency, with love. You are not an inconvenience. You are not too late. You are not broken. You are here, and that means everything is still possible. There's a quiet moment that happens in nearly every exam room with a man who finally came in after waiting too long. It doesn't happen when I say the diagnosis. It doesn't happen when we talk about the tests. It happens when he realizes for the first time in a long time that he doesn't have to carry this alone. That's when the shoulders drop. The breath deepens. The armor, so carefully held for so many years, begins to loosen. Just a little. And what comes through isn't weakness. It's relief. Relief that someone is finally looking where he couldn't. Relief that maybe this isn't the end, but a turning point. Relief that his story isn't over yet. I think of all the men I've met who told me, I thought I was too far gone. And then, weeks later, months later, they're smiling again, sleeping again, reaching out to people again. Not because we fixed everything, but because we stopped the drift. Drift happens slowly. That's what makes it dangerous. A little more tired, a little more disconnected, a little more resigned. You tell yourself, it's just the season. Then it's just the year. Then one day, you're looking back at a decade of silence, but the drift is reversible. You start by noticing one thing. You follow the thread. You ask a question, you take a step, and then your body begins to respond, because it was always trying to. I've seen men find themselves again through the smallest acts, switching their breakfast, stretching for 5 minutes in the morning, telling their partner, I'm not okay, but I want to be, making an appointment they've put off for 5 years. Every one of those choices was a door, and on the other side wasn't shame, it wasn't decline, it was presence. Real presence, the kind that lets you feel the warmth of your coffee, the texture of your wife's voice when she says your name, the way your chest opens when the pain lifts, not just physical pain, but the ache of wondering if you're slowly disappearing. You're not. You're still here. And if you've read or listened this far, then something inside you knows it. Something inside you is ready to come back to life. Not in one leap, not with one test, but with attention, with respect, with the courage to listen to your body before it has to scream. Because it's never too late to start paying attention. It's never too late to turn toward yourself instead of away. And if you do, gently, consistently, you might find that what's been waiting isn't just healing. It's you. The most powerful healing I've ever witnessed didn't happen in operating rooms. It didn't come from medications or scans or cutting-edge procedures. It happened when a man looked in the mirror, really looked, and said, "I want to stay." That was Edward, 74, retired mechanic, 2 grown kids, widower. He came to me not for pain, but for something harder to describe. "I feel like I've stepped outside of my own life," he said, "like I'm watching someone else go through the motions." He wasn't ill, not technically, but his blood pressure was creeping up. His blood sugar wasn't terrible, but not great either. He hadn't slept well in months, hadn't laughed in longer. His libido had vanished, and he was ashamed to say so. "I thought maybe this is just what happens," he said. "You fade." But no one just fades. We unravel, piece by piece, decision by decision, year by year, as we ignore the tiny losses. We tell ourselves it's nothing, that we're fine, that it'll pass, until we don't recognize who we've become. Edward didn't need a diagnosis. He needed permission. Permission to stop permission to reclaim his body, not as a project, but as a companion. Permission to ask, what if this isn't decline? What if this is repair? And so we started small, light strength training. Better sleep hygiene. A gentle look at hormones. A walk each morning, not for fitness, but for reconnection and conversation, the kind that doesn't rush, doesn't fix, doesn't judge. 3 months later, he came in wearing a flannel shirt that actually fit him again. "I got a dog," he said. "I figured someone should need me to show up every day." That dog saved him more than any medicine could, because it gave him a reason to listen to his body, to hydrate, to get outside, to play, to rest, to keep going. There's something sacred about wanting to live, not just survive, but inhabit your life. And that's what this whole story has been about. Not fear, not disease, not symptoms alone, but presence. The presence that returns when we stop ignoring what our bodies are trying to say, because symptoms are not betrayals. They're requests, not for pity, not for panic, but for partnership. A cough that won't go away, a shadow in your energy, a shift in your balance, a sense that you're less you than you used to be. These aren't annoyances. They are invitations. And the bravest thing you can do is answer one of them, gently, honestly, fully. That doesn't make you fragile. It makes you free. And if you take nothing else from this story, let it be this. Your body has never stopped speaking to you, not once. All it's waiting for is for you to finally say, "I hear you, I'm ready now." And then begin.